Okay, great. Hi everyone, my name is Nicole Turgeon. I'm a second year EM resident at Boston Medical Center, and today we'll be talking about how to create safer spaces for engaged learning, and we will discuss effective strategies to advance equity in medicine. We have no disclosures except if you were at our workshop on Monday, which I think only a few people were. There may be some recurrent themes, but we will be exploring them in more depth today. Our session is going to include a very brief lecture about discussing these specific strategies. We'll go over 4 of them, and then our breakout session is going to be actually practicing 1 to 2 of them, and then we'll wrap up and come back as a group and further discuss. These are our learning objectives. As already mentioned, I'll leave this up for a second for you to read. And now we'll get into the tools. But I'd like to pause there because so far in my introduction, I've told you my name and that I'm a resident and nothing else. Do you know anything about me? Do you know what my core values are? Do you know why I'm qualified to stand up here and give this talk to you today? Do you know what's important to me or why I think equity in medicine is important? I don't think any of those things are answered in our basic traditional introductions. In our society right now, our introductions focus on our professional career, and that's a singular identity, and we don't often bring a full personhood into our introductions, and that is very limiting. And so, if we can, we'll go back, and I'll start over. So hi everyone, my name is Nicole Turgeon. I use the She/Her series. I am a second year EM resident at Boston Medical Center. I racially identify as white, but I come from a long generation of Italian immigrants. I have a very close family that you can see in the corner here. I grew up with a dad who had substance use disorder, and that shaped a lot of my upbringing and a lot of the reasons why I'm in this work now. And I was first generation in higher education. I am the oldest sister, and if you are an older sibling, then I think you know that in and of itself is a personality trait. And at our residency, I serve as a co-chair for our Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion group. And I've held several other various positions on committees and in different organizations working on both local and global health equity. And I'm really excited to be here today to talk with you about how we can create safer spaces for engaged learning. And so I'll pause there again. You know a lot more about me now. The introduction took maybe another 15 to 20 seconds, but now you have a sense of what my background is, why I'm here, and it invites you to now ask me more questions and consider those things in yourself as well. And so today what we're going to do is learn tools that are meant to create safer spaces or brave spaces. This was something described by Marin Burton, and it allows people to come together to deeply listen and to develop more trust in one another and engage in more inclusive conversations. I will acknowledge that it's unrealistic to say that we can offer any one person a safe space, but by using these tools and strategies, we can work towards making them safer or braver spaces for us to come in as vulnerable people and not be afraid to make mistakes and have these hard conversations. And so on the screen, you'll see a few different strategies of which we will be discussing today. The first is the identity explicit introductions. So what I just demonstrated was something that what is now considered identity explicit. So instead of just using the implicit nature of an introduction with your name and your professionalism or professional titles, the only other thing that you knew about me was what you physically, what you see. You see that I have white skin, my hair color, you can hear my voice, whether or not I have an accent. And so a lot of times I fit a norm in our society, a white cis woman, but those things are not being explicitly named in my introduction because they're implicit. But when you think about other people who have darker skin color, who have an accent, who are non-binary, those things are not those are more explicit things that you can physically see and have biases towards. And so by making it a norm for us to address those concepts at the beginning of our introductions, especially when we're first coming into spaces, it's a way to make the invisible visible now. And so this is just an example of ways that you can pull different aspects of your life into your identity explicit introduction. But the key here is that it's fluid, right? We're human beings. We hold ourselves differently in different spaces that we operate in. And so my identity explicit introduction for this talk may look different now than it would if I'm in a different group situation. I may pull in different aspects of my identity depending on who I'm speaking with. So I've kind of mentioned a few reasons why, but just to hit on a few others. This is a way for us to begin uplifting identities that are not commonly represented in groups. It allows us to begin to flatten the hierarchies that exist within these groups by naming these things up front, and it offers personal connection. It allows you to know that I have cats, or that I have other aspects of my life that I'm inviting you to talk to me about, and that it's okay for us to have deeper conversations about these things. And lastly, it's a way to cultivate vulnerability and demonstrate full personhood. At our session on Monday, we had folks do an identity explicit introduction, and there were people who were talking about their IVF journey recently and being newly single. And these are topics that may not be directly relevant to the conversation, but by discussing them up front, you're more friendly now with that person. You have a deeper connection by knowing other aspects of their life that then allow you to create a safer space to have hard conversations with, as opposed to just knowing their professional identity. This brings me to understanding people's core values. So some of my core values came through in my introduction today. I've talked a lot about my roles within equity organizations and my work to advance equity in healthcare. And so to me, working towards health equity is a deep core value of mine. I think that it's a hard thing because when we think about our core values, you might not know what they are, but when you start thinking about your other identities and what you want to share with people, they really come through. So it can be a little bit awkward. It's a longer introduction than you're used to, but it actually makes it an easier way to, you can more quickly get into those conversations as opposed to the awkwardness of when you're first meeting people to begin with. And so just to kind of pause there again, I think that the other aspect is there's going to be resistance to using this type of introduction because it's not a typical one. People are going to say, well, it's taking too long in a meeting. Why would we waste, 10 to 15 minutes at the start of a meeting just by doing these introductions when you could just say your names or read someone's name? But again, our society right now, we're trying to figure out ways that will work better because we know that the way that we're doing it right now is not working. And so we have to start unlearning the norms of the way that we perform and operate, especially within an academic institution, if we actually are wanting to impart meaningful change and actually creating these spaces, because what we're doing right now is trying to fit in other people who don't look like the norm into these groups, particularly in like a white supremacy type of a culture. Like we are trying to make other people fit into that narrative that it's not built for. And so we need to start breaking that narrative and start doing things that are uncomfortable and that are not traditional in our society, because this is the only way we're going to be able to actually cultivate this type of environment that we want to see and make meaningful change. So we'll go into, so if you can't tell, the meat of this conversation today and the breakout session is going to be on identity explicit introductions, but there are, the next 3 strategies are a little bit briefer, but all of these are things that you can take into account and when you physically leave this room can start implementing in your work right now. So the next is the window of effective tolerance. And this is something that was coined by Denise Butler McKay and Abigail Ortiz, who actually are at the Southern Jamaica Plain Healthcare Center. And this is essentially a spectrum of a way to check in. And what happens is it's a scale of 10 to negative 10. And so at the start of a meeting or when you're checking in with someone, when you look at this graph, a 10 would be basically you're in like almost a manic state, and you probably need to be hospitalized because of how much energy you have. And a negative 10 is kind of on the opposite spectrum. You're almost catatonic, and again, you probably should be hospitalized. So most of us operate within this 5 to -5 window. And the negatives don't mean that it's actually a bad thing. It's just that you're more calm, or that you are in a more relaxed state. And so most of us operate in that window. These strategies all also work a little bit better with like longitudinal relationships, but they can be used in sort of one-off conversations if you bring it up and explain it to the group. But if you start using it regularly in your meetings or like on shift, for example, you will kind of see where your team members start operating. So some folks may operate at a 3 or at a -2, and they're regularly checking in at that level. But on days where they're off and they're checking in at a higher level or a lower level, it allows the team to pause and notice that there's someone who may need extra attention, and that you should kind of see where they're at and what they need at that moment. It also takes the onus off of that person to reach out for help, because if this is part of a normal check-in, then it's expected that if someone is in a different state than they're usually in, that the group will address that. And it takes that onus of someone needing to be the first one to reach out and say, I'm not in a good state, because it's now already implied that everyone's checking in with each other. Next is our community values or community agreements. So I think these are incredibly important, especially at the start of these types of sessions, but also within the groups that you're working with, to come up with a set of values that you're going to uphold during either the meeting or during your long time like working with each other. And so they can look very different for people. I think it's important that it comes from a group that you're working in. You develop those together up front. This is just an example. This is usually the way that I start off my sessions when we're going to do a workshop style and be working together and having these hard conversations, just so everyone is aware and on the same page about what we're expecting of each other. The one that I feel is very important to point out is that we all hold places of privilege in this society, in this world, and we all also lack that. And so the context that you're in changes the amount of privilege or power that you have. And so when you are checking in or when you are in that setting, it's important to reflect on sort of where you're landing. When you're discussing a hard topic with someone on racism, like you need to remind yourself of like where you fall in that level of power and privilege in that moment. And I think this is a way to help us kind of bring it back to ourselves and remind ourselves of where we are in the conversation and where we are in the group setting. Additionally, another really important, I think they're all important, but another one is asking for clarification if you don't understand something. So I think having that as a upfront norm is that it's going to allow it's inviting people to be inquisitive and not be punitive for not knowing something. In equity work and anti-racist work, in social justice work, I think a big barrier from what I've heard from colleagues is that they feel like they don't know what to say or they don't know how to ask questions, and they're afraid to do it because they think that they're going to cause harm or be reprimanded by not knowing something. And so by establishing the ground rule of like, if you don't understand it, it's okay to not have that knowledge, and we should be working in a collaborative setting instead of a punitive one. And the last strategy is grounding. I think this is probably the one that we're all most familiar with, especially in academic medicine. The kind of push for like mindfulness and wellness has been pretty big. And it's something that we all do, whether we intentionally are doing it or not. If you think about a busy shift or a really stressful conversation, think about that deep sigh that your body innately does. In and of itself, that is a grounding exercise that your body's auto-regulating to try to bring you back to the present moment. And so by being more intentional about establishing additional grounding techniques in your practices, whether that's on shift in your work environment or in your meetings. Again, this is another way to bring people back to the present, to get them to a more relaxed state. We know that meditation or these types of grounding exercises can reduce stress, anxiety, depression. There's been many studies on the benefits of this, but it takes intention to start incorporating them into our work. And this brings me back to the point that I will keep reiterating, is that we have to start doing things that are different and uncomfortable, because if we keep trying to do the same things in our norms and in the ways that we were taught, we're working in a broken system. We have to start branching out and doing things that are different. And so I invite everyone now to participate in a brief grounding exercise. Again, you may think I'm in a didactic at a conference and I'm about to do a brief meditation. That's weird, but that's the point, right? We have to be intentional about starting to incorporate these. We've also been at a conference now for 5 days, some of us longer, and I think a lot of us are either in a closer to that -5 or closer to that 5. Some people might be really hyped up because they've been really energized all week. Some people might be in that -5 where like, I'm done, I can't do that. So we'll do a brief exercise to try to get us closer to like the middle in there, and then we'll work as one group because there's only a few of us here, and we'll practice creating our own identities, our identity explicit introductions. And so I invite everyone to have their feet flat on the ground or just in whatever comfortable seat that you want to get in, and please close your eyes even though it may be uncomfortable. So imagine that you have a flashlight and you're directing it throughout your body. Start with your toes and your feet. Do you feel tightness, tingling, warmth, cold? Now move the flashlight onto your legs, your calves, your thighs. Is anything standing out in your mind? What are you feeling? Now shine the light into your stomach, your chest, up into your back. Again, what are you feeling? Take a deep breath. Feel what your arms are resting against, or how they feel if they're in your lap. Tingling, tightness, warmth, cold. What are you feeling? Take a deep breath and open your eyes. And so even a very brief grounding exercise like that before getting into what could be a really hard conversation when we are working in our groups discussing difficult topics related to social or structural injustices can be a good way to just get everyone on the same playing field and moving into those hard conversations. So next we have some worksheets that we will distribute, and we will work at our tables to craft your identity explicit introductions. Yes. Well, so I think that there's kind of like, I think we should wrap up now. But to your point, Dana, I think that's a really great point. Because people are going to roll their eyes at these things. This is not something I think that by any means do we expect you to like go on shift when you're meeting a patient, or when you go meet with someone else in your institution that you're just going to start rattling off this identity explicit introduction. But it's a start for your more personal like meetings, like teams, that you can start introducing these concepts. It's not going to be a norm where at every instant people are going to take 30 seconds to a minute to introduce themselves like this. It's not realistic. When you have a 60-minute meeting and you have 20 people there, it's not going to happen. But it's a first step, and it's one tool out of we named 4. There's many other ones, but we use 4 of them today for you to start utilizing and start introducing when you go back to the institution. It's the same thing where any concept like this is going to be, there's going to be people who roll their eyes at it, but the more we can cultivate these spaces with ourselves, or the kind of self-selecting people who are trying to do this work, and create a deeper sense of camaraderie among ourselves, it then makes it easier to challenge the people who don't necessarily believe in it. And it makes you you have a deeper sense of like commitment to that and commitment to your peers who you're working with. And you may have more of a sense of like courage, like or courageousness to push back on it. And so all that to be said, I appreciate the point. It is definitely something that we don't expect you to use every time, but each of these things can be brought back. For example, for me, I'm about to step up into a senior role at our institution, and I plan to introduce this window of tolerance on my shifts to check in with my junior residents and my co-staff to see where people are at, and then you can get that sense of where people are and when there's days where they're off. That way you know at the start, and then you can adjust your shift accordingly. That's just one way that I can use it. I hope everyone takes away something, and when you go back home, start using these things.